How's everyone doing? Thanks for joining me on my small engine repair channel. Today's project is on this little Craftsman single stage, 21 inch wide, 52061 single stage snowblower. And in today's video, I'm going to show you how to clean out the carburetor on one of these things. Got you up here on my little lawnmower lift. To get access to the carburetor here, I just flipped it up on its lid here, and there's two bolts, one here and one over here, that you have to take off. I've pretty much taken those off already. Now, here on the sides of this plate, there's a little plastic thing that goes around the handle. So you're gonna have to, gently bend that over to get that up and around. This side's a little bit trickier, but there it is, the piece I'm talking about. You don't want to break these things, and I'm not going to do this one-handed, but you're going to have to try and get this little piece off without breaking it there. So now that gives us access to this carburetor. As you can see, I've already taken off the fuel tank. That's going to be incorporated into a different video on this particular machine. That fuel tank would sit up in here, and then there'd be a fuel line that comes to your machine here. So if you still have fuel in your tank, clamp off the fuel line using some fuel line clamps or vice grips. Just do it gently, and take off the hose clamp, and then pull off your fuel line from there. So now we're basically here ready to take off this carburetor. You can see there's a choke flap that comes through here. We're probably going to have to, as we pull this thing out and down, this handle should probably slide off, I presume, but it's just these two bolts here that we're going to take off next. All right, so just get yourself 10 millimeter. Okay, let's take this guy off. Just remember it goes this way with the hood on the top. Okay, now there's some linkages here in the back that we're gonna have to get off before we can pull this thing out. All right, so to get this linkage off here on the back, you have to pull the carburetor out and then just slide the linkage up. So it's just a 90-degree bend there. And now it should be ready to come off the studs here. I might just leave that choke flap on there. And then last thing I gotta do is take off this primer line here. Now everything on this thing is super crusty. So I'm going to use a little tool I made for getting off little fuel lines off of two-stroke machines. First, release that clamp. And there we go. Now we got our carburetor off. I'll take you over to the bench. Alright guys, so to take one of these apart, first thing you're going to do is just take off the bowl in the bottom. It's a 10 millimeter nut. It's going to give us our first indication of how bad this thing really is. That's not a good sign. Nice rusty bolt. And survey says that's pretty bad. I don't know how this thing ran, I'll be honest with you. That's crazy. I don't know that this is going to be salvageable. I'm going to do my best because I don't want to buy a new carburetor for this thing. I've already spent enough money on it. Alright, next float pin. The float with the needle valve. Again, needle doesn't look great. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a ring around it. I'm going to try and condition that needle because, again, I don't want to buy any more parts for this thing. This is just getting to be too big of a project, too expensive. So next thing we gotta do is take out a jet. There's a main jet down the center, down in here. You can see it there. It takes a flathead screwdriver, but you need a flathead screwdriver that has a straight shank, not a flared out shank. And these things, with this one, I'd be surprised if it doesn't give me a hard time because of the condition of this thing. But you push down as you're turning to try and apply plenty of pressure so you don't strip the threads or the head on that jet, because it's just a little brass jet. Now I suspect this jet is actually not going to be in that bad of a shape because the thing ran miraculously. Oh, there's the jet and the emulsion tube, so that's good. Okay, yeah, this jet is actually in great shape. You can see right through that big hole right in the center there. Usually that gets clogged up with gunk. So that's in good shape. It just looks like the bowl is in rough shape. On your emulsion tube that also came out of that same hole, there's a bunch of small holes. There they are. And you're just going to want to make sure all those holes are all nice and cleaned out. So what you can do, there's a little bit of junk on it here, you can see. But you can get yourself a little piece of wire from a wire brush or something equivalent. Here's a little bread tie. Some of these holes are pretty small, so you might have to see this. These holes are too small. There's 3 bigger ones here, but actually 6 bigger ones. But you're just going to want to go through each and every one of these holes to make sure that they're nice and clear. All right, and then after you're done that, you can spray some carb cleaner in each of these holes. Okay, I'm not going to do all that because I'm going to throw this in my ultrasonic cleaner. You're going to also, once this jet is cleaned out, again with a piece of little piece of wire, you're going to want to spray that with some carb spray as well if you don't have yourself an ultrasonic cleaner. Alright, and then the last thing we're going to do for taking this thing apart is get the idle jet out. So this is an idle screw. It sets the idle speed. You can see this throttle linkage only goes so far. It hits the idle screw. But we never run these things at idle, so setting this is not really doesn't need to be an exact science. But if you notice, let's see if I can get a good shot of this. And this is how I reset it up. You notice that that idle screw sits on top of this guy right here. This is your idle jet. So it sits, the end of that screw sits in the center of this jet right here. So when I put this thing back together, that's exactly how I'm going to set this idle screw. So this just screws out. It's just plastic, a plastic screw on this one. Okay, and then to get this idle jet out, you can just kind of pry up on one or both sides of this idle jet. Okay, so this idle jet has a big huge hole for air to draw up a little bit of fuel through this little jet, which you're probably not going to see on this camera. But there is a little brass jet opening there. And right in the end of that, there is again a small little hole, and this is probably equivalent at least to the smallest holes on your emulsion tube. And I found that This one does require you to use a piece of wire, probably from electrical wire strand or from a wire brush. So you can see this one is actually not clogged, and again, this is probably the reason why this thing is running. But this is our main problem. Okay, so now that this whole thing is taken apart, I'm just going to take that off because that won't fit in my ultrasonic cleaner. This is where the fuel comes in from your fuel line, and then it goes through this little passageway and comes out here through your needle valve. Okay, so again, this needle valve doesn't look great. Or maybe no, it's just me. It looks fine. There's no line on it. It's actually just, no, that's just fine. So I am going to take this off though, because I don't want to run this in my ultrasonic cleaner. It has a little spring on it, so you kind of have to pull that spring down as it's supposed to kind of keep this needle valve or needle locked into the float. So I'm not going to put that in the ultrasonic cleaner. The other thing you want to do with these floats to test them is just shake them. If there's any fluid in there, then that means that this thing is taking on fluid, and you're going to want to replace that, because otherwise it's going to flood your carburetor and leak. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of clean up some of these surfaces, some of this gunk and stuff like that, and blow it all off, spray it with some carb spray, blow it all off, and then put it in my ultrasonic cleaner for about 15 minutes with the heat on. If you don't have an ultrasonic cleaner, just try and do your best to clean out all the little passageways. Clean out the passageway here for the fuel and the emulsion tube. All right, clean out the passageway here for your idle jet, which corresponds to this hole in the front. So again, take a piece of wire, run it through that idle jet. You can kind of see it coming through there. So make sure that that's nice and clean. This one as well. Again, just run it through there. Spray all these passageways with some carb spray, and then you can put it all back together. All right, so I'm just gonna try and use just a wire brush. Try and clean up this as much as I can before I throw it into the ultrasonic cleaner. Now this one's going to be the tough one. And you can start out with the wire brush here. Some of this is so corroded. Like, this bowl really should be replaced, but again, we're going to see how good we can get it in our ultrasonic cleaner. It's never going to be perfect again once it starts going down that rust path, but I'm going to switch to a piece of steel wool here, but I'm not going to do this in and around the carburetor, especially if you're not going to put in an ultrasonic cleaner afterwards, because the little fibers from the steel wool, you don't want to get that anywhere inside your carburetor. So I'm going to do this off camera, but just going to maybe throw some carb spray in there and then try and get this as good as I can. Alright, so this is where I've gotten it before putting it into the ultrasonic cleaner, and a lot of that is just pit. So I think all the surface rest is gone. I don't think the ultrasonic cleaner is going to really clean that up much more, but we'll see. Alright, so I got my parts all cleaned up now. Came out okay. I mean, these ultrasonic cleaners are not you know, the end all be all. So as I suspected, the bowl, it probably not any better at all. But again, that's all just pitted stuff. So I'm okay with using that. So now to put it all back together. So we'll start, I guess, with the reverse of how we took it apart. We just put our idle screw, our idle jet in, and you can see how there's two flat edges on the front and the back side here. Those have to go horizontally or line up parallel to the long edge, or this line right here. So when you put it in, it won't go in the other way actually, so it's kind of fail safe, but you're going to put it in that way and then push it down as best you can. Put your idle screw in, and again, I'm just going to screw it in until, make sure your tools are nice and clean. Screw it in until it's halfway across that idle jet. The end of it is halfway across. So just like that. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is to put the needle back on the float. And to do this, again, you're going to have to pull down this spring somehow and just make sure you don't let it go and have it fly across the room, because you'll never find it again. And it goes onto the bottom side, which is going to make it even trickier here. So pull it down all the way as best you can, and maybe hold it with a fingernail or something like that. And then stick it on there. And that's how it goes. Okay. Put in my emulsion tube. The emulsion tube, in case you didn't see which way it fell out, goes this way. So the fat end goes towards the top. The skinny end goes down. Okay. Then the the main jet only goes in one way, because you need the threads on the flat head cut out. Needs to be obviously at the top, so you can get your screwdriver on there. And you're just gonna just snug it up. Don't get it in there too tight, because the next guy or yourself, you might not be able to get it out again next time. Okay, so that's good. Now, before I put the needle valve back in the seat area, I'm going to put a couple drops of this 3-in-1 oil. Alright, just because it's a rubber tip. Okay, I'll drop that on in there. Take my float pin. You got to line up the holes in these posts with the holes on the hole in the float. Okay, now I will usually test these things to make sure, pressure test them to make sure before I put them on, that this needle valve is actually seating properly. So with it in this position, okay, upside down, what you can do is blow in where the fuel comes into the carburetor, and that needle should stay seated. And if it's not making a good seal, you'll hear that air blow through that and past that rubber tip of the needle valve. Okay, so I blew in there. I didn't hear anything. If it was leaking, you would probably hear something like this. Hopefully you'll hear that, but ours seems pretty good. You can hook it up to a pressure tester as well. This is what I would do, but most people don't have these tools, so just showing you the old school way. And you just pump it up to about 5 psi and make sure that it holds the pressure for 30 seconds or so. And typically if there is a leak, you'll probably hear it and you'll see that gauge going down. So that needle and seat is actually making a good seal. You would not want to put that back together and have that needle valve not shut off the fuel, because then it's just going to flood and it's going to leak fuel all over your garage or wherever you store this thing. So last thing I'm going to put on is this the bowl, and I want the drain nut in the front. So that's kind of my only stipulation. Put your bowl nut back on, 10 mil, just snug it up. And that's it. Now she's ready to go back on the machine. Alright guys, so just to give you a slightly better view of how that linkage comes in here. It comes in through the top. It's just a 90-degree linkage. It goes this way and down. So as you're putting it on, you want to grab your linkage and then you find the sweet spot in or out so that this kind of lines up with the angle of the linkage, and push it all the way down and then all the way in after that. So let me show you what I mean. Okay, so you don't want to have it all the way down. Just till you get that right angle, that sweet spot there, which is about here. And then once you get that linkage in, you push it in, and then just test your throttle linkage. Okay, hook up your little spring to the throttle, the one that's broken on mine. And that's good. You can hook up your primer line. Good there. Then put your plate in. And get your two 10 mil bolts. And lock those down. Hook up your fuel line to here. Right, and that's it. So hopefully this was informative. If you like the video, please go ahead, smash the like button down below. Helps me out on the channel. If you're not a subscriber already, consider doing so. Really also helps me out on the channel. So until our next project, guys, take care.